Let's talk about some foods that barely spike your insulin, and also when you should utilize these foods, because you don't want to just go eat them whenever, willy-nilly. So in this world, we have people that are serious calorie counters, and candidly, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then you have the other side of the spectrum, which are like serious insulin counters, people that really pay attention to how much they're spiking their insulin. And then there's people like me that are kind of in the middle. I believe in both sides. I do believe that we should monitor insulin because I feel like insulin stands in the way of fat loss. If we are eating a lot of food and we're also spiking our insulin, we're going to end up gaining weight. But at the very least, we're going to end up standing in the way of burning fat because insulin inhibits fat burning, lipolysis. So let's just jump right in. The first one I'm super happy to see here, and that is ghee. Ghee has practically zero insulin spike whatsoever. Even if you consume butter, there's a little bit of an insulin spike because there's proteins, there's milk solids, but ghee was originally created to basically preserve butter. By removing the lactose and the milk solids and things like that, you're left with pure butter fat, which does not go rancid. It's a very stable oil. I mean, it can go rancid if really pushed to the limits, right? But most of the time, you're pretty stable. So this is great for multiple reasons as far as consumption is concerned. It's stable within our body, it's not going to oxidize, it's rich in butyrate, so it's good for the gut, but it does not spike insulin because there's practically nothing to it but a short chain fat. Now there was a study published in Comparative Study that took a look at what ghee does when combined with rice, which is very interesting. So they actually combined ghee to rice when cooking it, to either white rice or red rice. And they found that when ghee was added to rice when boiling it, like just added into the water, it made a tremendous difference on how that rice affected blood glucose. Now you might be thinking, okay, well this doesn't really have to do with insulin, this is more just about fat slowing down digestion of carbs. And to a certain degree that's true. But then when you look at other data and you see, oh, well compared to vegetable oil, because that's what they did with the study is they looked at ghee or vegetable oil mixed with rice. Vegetable oil didn't really change the glucose spike associated with the rice, but ghee did. So it looks as though ghee might have a superpower. Ghee might not just be pretty much zero insulin spike, but ghee also has the ability to reduce the amount of insulin needed when combined with carbs. I'm not a big fan of combining fats and carbs usually, but this is pretty interesting. So when should you use ghee? I would recommend using ghee when you feel like you need calories, but you do not want to spike insulin. A perfect example of this is like maybe you're fasting, or maybe you're just not eating and you're really trying not to consume carbs, you're even really trying not to consume protein, but you feel like, you know what, I need some energy, I need some calories, I don't want to lose a lot of weight, I'm trying to get health benefits of fasting, but I don't want to lose weight. Well, that would be a great time to add ghee in. Because ghee has pretty powerful properties for the gut too, but you're not going to have that insulin spike. So that's the best time to add ghee. Otherwise, you can add ghee on top of some protein to help reduce the potential insulin spike that comes along with protein. What? Protein spikes insulin? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second, but it's not really a bad thing. The next one is a very unique kind of seed. Now I consider it more of a nut, but technically it's a seed. It's called Sacha Inchi. I've talked about Sacha Inchi on this channel before, but Sacha Inchi is very unique because for one, it's literally like the only nut that I know of that is zero net carb. Absolutely zilch, zero. There's like 5 grams of carbs in a serving, but there's also 5 grams of fiber. So it nets out to 0. But we know fiber is good for reducing an insulin spike, but what else is unique about this? Because there's lots of zero net carb foods out there that don't make this list. Well, it might have to do with the oil in Sacha Inchi itself. If you look at a study that was published in Food and Function, they took a look at over 40 individuals and they had them consume a breakfast with carbs and saturated fat or a breakfast with carbs and Sacha Inchi oil. The group that had the carbs and Sacha Inchi oil, the vast majority of them had a massive improvement in their postprandial glucose compared to the saturated fat group. I don't have a problem with saturated fat. What I'm questioning here is what is it about the oil that is actually bringing glucose down? It has a net positive effect. So that might be why when you take a seed like this that has 0 grams of net carbs plus a unique property within the oil that seems to either not produce or release insulin at all or even have a positive impact. But what else is interesting about this is a very high protein nut seed thing. very high protein with a very rich amino acid profile, and very high in leucine, which would normally spike insulin. I know I'm getting complicated here, but my point is this is validating that something unique is going on here. So Sacha Inchi seems to be probably one of the most powerful seeds that you can eat to just have a net zero effect. So my place in which you might want to add Sacha Inchi seeds is if you feel like you need some protein, you need something a little bit more stabilizing, satiating, rather than just maybe having some ghee. And the protein's still gonna work in Sacha Inchi, but you're gonna get it without an insulin spike. So if you're doing a very strict low carb protocol, Sacha Inchi would be a really good snack, okay? Or if you came off of a fast and you don't wanna have a big spike in insulin, Sacha Inchi would be a really perfect one. Or if you're looking for something to combine with carbohydrates, that's going to allow the carbohydrate impact to be a little bit less, Sacha Inchi would be perfect. I popped a link down below for Brass Roots Sacha Inchi. Okay, I know Aaron, the owner, really well. He's an awesome dude that's really put together a great organization that helps families in need, helps people that are in need, and helps overall just people eat better as well. And they help out with just overall nutritional education in poorer communities. So just a really cool brand overall, but their flavors of Sacha Inchi are awesome. They have like salt and vinegar, but now they have some newer flavors. They have a sweet heat flavor that is sweetened with no sugar or anything like that, so it still doesn't affect the carbs, but it's got a really like sweet hot taste, really good. And then they've got a truffle parmesan flavor that is unbelievable as well, like a really, really good flavor. And they're coming out with some other really cool things too, like some dark chocolate covered ones that only have a couple grams of sugar if you wanted to add those in. Bottom line is, I popped a link down below for a special discount. So you have to use that link that's down below, top line of the description below this video. They're a big supporter on this channel, so a big thank you to Brass Roots. Definitely check them out for a zero or low insulin spike snack. This next one is the protein wild card. The weirdest thing that I've seen in a while, okay, because protein spikes insulin. Don't be afraid of this, it does, okay. The protein, the leucine, the amino acids, they cause an insulin spike so that the protein can get into the cell. Without insulin, nutrition can't get into the cell. Nutrients can't come in. So it's okay that protein spikes insulin because it's usually countered with another hormone called glucagon. So it balances out. So it might raise your glucose a little bit, but nothing like a carbohydrate would. But for people that are really monitoring insulin spikes, they watch this, like Walter Longo, people like this that are really looking at like the longevity research and how insulin plays a role, they really do say, hey, keep protein spikes low too. What is it about cod? Well, we don't really know the mechanism here, but for whatever reason, cod has a very, very, very minimal insulin spike. Does that mean that you're not assimilating the protein? No, that seems to be just fine. There just seems to be minimal insulin spike. In fact, there's a study published in the European Journal of Nutrition that compared cod protein to casein protein, and they found that when subjects consumed cod protein, a couple hours later, their glucose was 7.3 millimoles down from 8 millimoles, whereas the casein protein, it didn't drop at all. So cod protein actually dropped glucose, which was interesting. Here's what's interesting though. Casein protein, I know this sounds complicated, but casein protein is something that is normally really slow digesting and doesn't spike glucose or doesn't spike insulin very high to begin with. So the fact that cod was significantly better than casein says a whole lot. For example, something like whey protein will spike your insulin very high, and that's not bad, but it is going to abruptly stop fat loss for a moment in time until you kind of digest and get back on track. So does that mean that you should just be like sitting down and eating cod all the time? I mean, that's not exactly attractive, but I will say a practical time to be having cod would be, okay, maybe you finished a fast and you don't want to continue to spike insulin, but you need to get a lot of protein in. You could, in theory, really continue fat burning effects quite significantly with cod without disrupting this. And what's interesting is, like, if you look at a lot of bodybuilders that are getting into their final stages of contest prep, almost always they're eating cod. And maybe this is why. It's always one of those things, like, it just works, right? Like, if you start switching over to lean fish and white fish, you will probably drop fat. It's just crazy how it works. It's lower calorie, but maybe it's because these white fishes, like cod, don't spike insulin so much, so we stay in that fat burning mode better. So cod for dinner could be great because you don't spike insulin, you go to bed, your insulin's still low, and you're still having this maximum fat burning. It's pretty awesome. So that's a good place to try it. Next up is going to be avocados. Avocados are interesting because if you look at the research, you see, okay, avocados combined with carbohydrates, they slow down carbohydrate absorption. We know that because when you combine a fat with a carb, that happens. But what's interesting about avocados? Well, avocados on their own are almost a zero insulin spike. High fiber, high fat, monounsaturated fats that actually improve insulin sensitivity. A couple, loose cannon grams of carbs in there, but nothing, it's totally negligible, right? But what's interesting is that when you compare avocados with other fats combined with carbs, that actually lowers the glucose more. We don't really understand the full reason why, but where you might want to insert an avocado into the mix is maybe if you're having some protein and you're trying to keep insulin levels as low as possible. So let's say like maybe after you break your fast, like your first meal after a fast or something like that, might be a good time to have protein with avocado, because the avocado might very well attenuate the glucose spike that comes with the protein. Again, we're getting really granular here. I'm not expecting everyone to freak out over insulin, but I do think that, hey, if we can keep this stuff in mind and have in our back pocket the foods that are best when it comes down to minimal insulin response, it can help. Now, additionally, if you're trying to keep glucose levels stable in the morning, I'm a big fan of adding avocado to eggs. Okay, so have your eggs, have a little avocado with them, make your own little huevos rancheros kind of thing with a little salsa, maybe no beans, but whatever, do something like that. Keep your insulin levels nice and low in the morning so you can really kick into that fat burning mode earlier on in the day. And then the last food that we have to talk about is another one in the nut category, and that's going to be macadamia nuts. Okay, macadamia nuts are unique and they're probably one of my favorite nuts. I love Sacha Inchis, I love macadamia nuts, I love pili nuts. Those are the ones that I really live by. Macadamia nuts are interesting because yes, they do have a couple of rogue carbohydrates in them, but the net carbs are still very, very low. But there's such a high monounsaturated fat content that they improve insulin sensitivity so much that even if there is an insulin spike, it helps you utilize the carbs so well that it almost comes down to a net zero. So do they stop fat loss? I mean, any calorie you take in is going to stop fat loss. But when the net impression on your body is a little bit less, it's perfect. So when would you have macadamia nuts? Macadamia nuts are great on their own as a little snack just for some satiety, but what I would typically recommend is you have macadamia nuts alongside protein, because then you're getting the monounsaturated fats along with the protein, making this perfect combination for insulin sensitivity. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. Don't forget to check out Brass Roots down below, and I'll see you tomorrow.